In the same way that here in English, we do not have a physical word for the emotion of Liget as experienced by the Alongot tribe, we'll find that there's many emotions that other people in other parts of the world find to be quite powerful in their cultural context, and yet we in English just don't have words for them, and vice versa. Okay, vice versa. Okay? So linguistic relativity, and we're going to explore this more in the cognition chapter. But linguistic relativity is, the extent to which the language we speak influences the way we think. And it turns out that English has more words for emotions than any other language. We have over 2,000. The Chuang, a group within Malaysia, they only have 8 words total to express their entire emotional world, right? Or more specifically, some cultures have words for what they would consider somewhat basic emotions that don't map onto. So the Polish just don't even have the word for disgust. Yet Ekman said it's a universal basic, but the Polish language doesn't even have that word. Okay, the Buganda of Uganda who speak Luganda, it's a true story. It's Dr. Susan Action. They don't distinguish between grief and sorrow, right? This group of Aborigines in Australia, shame and something I can't remember, shame and fear, I believe it was, but it's underneath my face. Samoans have this word alofa. Alofa means both love and pity. I guess I can understand that connection. In Micronesia, this group, the Ifiluk, they don't even have this word emotion. Instead, hunger and anxiety and whatever are all sort of one lump term. Okay. And so we find Iklas is just like we had seen with the Olongot in the what was it again? The Liget, and Iklas. These are extremely important in the cultures that these people have, and yet there is no word in English to match them. Okay? And so here's some more specific emotions that might be tied to a particular cultural group. Acedia, a spiritual torpor. I don't know this one offhand. Middle Ages and Renaissance. Ame, yeah, Ame is really interesting. We're going to come back to that at one point. But it's this feeling of dependency. Clearly, it can only occur in an interdependent cultural context. That is, a pleasant feeling you receive from being helpless for all practical purposes. Yeah, from an independent cultural context. You're supposed to feel good, when you failed and are dependent on others. Doesn't make sense. Or we have some of these other ones, let's say guzzling, a cozy or something like that. This one is shared by many of the Northern European nations, or a similar basic idea, a coziness, something of this nature. You've of course got Liget, etc. Schadenfreude is, this German emotional experience of the pleasure you receive by watching somebody else suffering. Maybe the Germans are willing to admit that this is a pleasant emotional experience. Nobody else is willing to admit it, but it's true, okay? Schramm, a feeling of shame of sorts. Patriotism, which is an emotional experience, which in some ways is similar to how Liggett was tied into the Ilongots cultural worldview. Patriotism can be tied into the American worldview, right? It's just a way of thinking that goes above and beyond. I mean, all you have to do is look at the politics around us to see that patriotism has imbued itself as something far more than an emotional experience. Here's a very specific emotional experience that occurs in Korean cultural contexts. Okay, so it's a shame of sorts, and so it's the shame that you feel. So it was explained to me that it's kind of like you wake up in the morning and you make a judgment call, and you think, okay, it's going to be cold today, so you put a coat on. Then you get to the subway and you get on the train, and nobody else is wearing a coat. Okay, and so it's chakpolya. And what we find is chakpolya, when you break down the components to it, that the two syllables there are face and cell. Okay, And so selling face, that sounds kind of similar to when we talked about saving face, when we talked about motivations, right? And so it's a very similar context. Or another one which permeates in the same way that I can talk about patriotism permeating more of an American cultural belief system or a cultural way of thinking is this notion of Han. Han is a lot of things. In one way, Han is the name of the primary ethnic group. Han can refer to the country as a whole, right? Or the beginning of the country or something of this nature. But it's been tied into a national grief of sorts that the Japanese occupation of Korea during the latter parts of the 1800s, all the way through the end of World War II, has created this grief, this loss of identity, this just so much more. And it has been magnified in many ways by having the divided nation between the North and the South. That it's a grief, a longingness, a loss of who we are, a loss of soul, a loss of identity. And it just permeates all thinking in the nation.